It was the kind of find that didn't happen every day. The kind of discovery that could change the course of someone's life forever. And yet, I almost missed it. I was working my usual shift at the local antique store, sorting through boxes of old papers and forgotten trinkets. The store had always been a quiet place, full of dusty shelves and forgotten memories. Some people came in to look for something specific, but most of the time it was just passers-by poking through things they didn't need. But that day, something caught my eye. I was going through a box of old maps, brittle and yellowed with age, when I found it. A piece of parchment tucked in between two large, rolled-up topographic maps. It was folded carefully, the edges frayed with age, and when I opened it, I felt an immediate sense of unease. The map was crude, hand-drawn, and it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It depicted a small village, nestled between what looked like thick forests and rugged mountains. The ink was dark and uneven, and the name of the village was written in faded script that read, Hollis Haven. There was something strange about it. The village wasn't marked on any modern map, and the location was buried deep in an area of dense wilderness, so isolated that it felt almost impossible that anyone had lived there. But what really caught my attention were the markings around the village itself. Small, cryptic symbols surrounded it, as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. There were warnings written in tiny, almost illegible handwriting, but the words were too faded for me to read. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I examined the map more closely. There was something off about it, something that made my gut twist. The village was in a remote location, almost unreachable, marked only by a dotted line leading off into the unknown. The more I stared at it, the more I became convinced that this map wasn't just a relic of history. It wasn't just a tourist guide or a forgotten scrap of land. It was something more. I wasn't alone in the store. Old Mr. Dawson, the owner, was sitting in the back, reading the newspaper as usual. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the map was calling to me. I felt an inexplicable pull to find this place, to see if it really existed, and if it did, to understand the mystery surrounding it. But before I could ask anyone about it, I heard Mr. Dawson clearing his throat. I looked up, startled, and he gave me a knowing look, his eyes glinting with something that wasn't quite right. "That map you found," he said, his voice gravelly. "You'd be wise to leave it where it is." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, folding the newspaper with an air of finality. "People who've gone looking for that village, well, they never come back. There's no reason for you to get involved in something like that." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, and I immediately felt that same sense of unease return. I had been intrigued by the map, but now a heavy feeling settled in my chest. There was more to this story than I could see, more than the faded ink on the paper could reveal. And yet, despite the warning, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. I had to know more. Mr. Dawson didn't say anything else after that. He seemed to retreat back into his shell, his eyes darting nervously between the map and the door. It was clear he didn't want to talk about it, but I couldn't let it go. I had to know what had happened to the people who had disappeared, and why no one seemed to want to talk about Hollis Haven. The story was unfinished, and I couldn't help myself. I was going to find out what had happened. That night, I tucked the map carefully into my bag, its worn edges poking out. I hadn't made up my mind yet about what I was going to do with it, but there was no way I could leave it behind. The mystery was too compelling, and my curiosity had already begun to spiral into something much bigger than I could control. The following morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The map, hidden in my bag, felt heavy, like it was calling to me even before I had a chance to look at it again. But there was no turning back now. The curiosity had already taken hold, and I couldn't stop myself from wanting to see where it led, even if it meant venturing into the unknown. I spent the rest of the day at work, distracted and uneasy. I couldn't focus on anything but the map, and Mr. Dawson's cryptic warning echoed in my mind like an omen. They never came back. What had happened to them? Why had they disappeared? By the time I returned home that evening, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I pulled the map out of my bag, spreading it across my kitchen table. The faded ink, the hand-drawn markings, the cryptic symbols around Hollis Haven. It was like a puzzle, and every piece seemed to push me further into a story I wasn't prepared for. But no matter how many times I stared at the map, I couldn't make out all of the markings. Some were too faint to read, others seemed intentionally obscured, as though the person who created the map didn't want certain parts known. I picked up my phone, researching the location, but nothing came up. Hollis Haven wasn't listed anywhere online, not on any government site, no historical records, no mentions in any travel guides. The more I searched, the less I found. It was as if the village didn't exist, except that the map said it did. It was real, somewhere deep in the woods. Frustrated and more curious than ever, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reached out to a couple of friends who had experience in hiking, wilderness navigation, and even old urban legends. None of them had heard of Hollis Haven either, which only added to my unease. I figured that even if this was a lost, forgotten village, I could find it if I followed the map's coordinates carefully. After all, the town was hidden, but it had to be somewhere. I made plans for the weekend. I gathered supplies, water, a few snacks, a compass, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. I didn't want to overthink it. The map was simple enough. A few rough markers showed the location, the trailhead, and what looked like a mountain pass that led into a valley. I could find it. The village would reveal itself. The day of the hike arrived, and I packed my backpack with the essentials, ready to leave. I felt both excitement and trepidation swirling in my chest. It was just a hike, right? A quiet adventure into the unknown. What could go wrong? I parked my car at the edge of a small forest access road, just where the map indicated the trail began. I studied the map one more time before I started walking, trying to commit the route to memory. The air was crisp, the sunlight dappled through the canopy of trees above. Birds chirped in the distance, and the scent of pine and fresh earth filled my lungs. I almost wanted to believe that Mr. Dawson had been exaggerating. Maybe the map was just an old relic of a forgotten era, not something that would lead me into danger. But as I followed the path, the air grew denser. The trees became taller, their trunks wider and darker. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. The sounds of nature, the chirps of birds and rustling of animals faded into a strange, unnatural stillness. The woods felt alive, but not in the way I was used to. It was almost as if the trees were watching me, listening. I kept going, driven by the map, driven by the need to see this place, this village, for myself. I felt as though the forest was pushing me forward, guiding me. Or maybe it was the map that was pulling me. After several hours of hiking, I came to a clearing. I stopped at the edge and stared at the scene before me. It was hard to believe, but there it was. the remains of what could only be a village, ruins, stone foundations, crumbling brick walls, a few broken windows, vines and moss covered what little was left. The buildings were in disrepair, abandoned. No signs of life, no sounds of movement. It was like stepping into a place that time had forgotten. The air felt different now, heavier, as though the very ground beneath me was holding its breath. I stepped closer, a chill creeping up my spine. The village was eerily quiet, not a sound except the wind rustling the trees and the occasional creak of a broken beam or falling stone. I moved through the streets carefully, inspecting the remnants of what used to be homes, shops, and perhaps a church. But as I walked, I noticed something strange. The walls of the buildings, what was left of them, were covered in symbols. The same kind of markings I had seen on the map, drawn into the stone with a steady hand. They were carved deeply, not random graffiti, but deliberate, almost ritualistic. I didn't know what they meant, but they gave me an unsettling feeling. This wasn't just a forgotten village. This place had history, dark history. I walked through what was once the main square and found a strange well in the center. Its stone rim was cracked, and the wood around it had rotted away. But what caught my attention were the markings surrounding the well, symbols similar to the ones on the buildings, but this time they were arranged in a circular pattern surrounding the opening. I stepped closer, feeling a pull toward the well. I knew it was irrational, but something deep inside me urged me to look inside, to see what was down there. I leaned over the edge, peering into the blackness below. For a moment, I saw nothing, just the inky depth of the well. But then, movement. A flicker, something just out of sight. It was gone before I could react. A sharp chill ran down my spine, and I pulled away from the well, my heart pounding. Something wasn't right. I had to leave. The map. This place. It wasn't just a forgotten village. It was a warning. And the whispers, the pull from the well, they were just the beginning. The moment I stepped back from the well, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. A primal fear creeping over me like a cold mist. It wasn't just the movement I'd seen in the depths of the well. It was the sensation that something was here with me. Something that had been waiting. Something ancient. The feeling in my gut tightened into a knot. I took a few steps back, my eyes darting around the village. The buildings, the ruins. They weren't just abandoned. They felt abandoned, as though whatever had lived here had been driven out or had simply vanished into thin air. It was as if the village had been frozen in time, a place marked by something so profoundly unsettling that it had been left to rot. And yet, the symbols on the walls, the well, the unsettling silence, it all pointed to something that wasn't as simple as decay, something supernatural. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to focus. I had come this far. I wasn't going to back down now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the village itself was alive, breathing, watching. I glanced up at the trees surrounding the village, tall, ancient pines that seemed to stand like silent sentinels, their twisted limbs reaching out like skeletal hands. They blocked most of the light, casting long shadows that stretched out over the village. It felt like the forest itself was keeping something from me, a secret buried beneath the ground. I took a few more steps, cautiously approaching what appeared to be a small, dilapidated chapel near the center of the village. The roof had collapsed in several places, and the windows were shattered, but there was a strange pull about it. Something about the place seemed to hold more answers, and I knew I had to keep moving forward if I was going to get them. As I entered the chapel, I felt the temperature drop. It was a subtle shift, but it was enough to make my skin prickle with unease. The air inside was thick, musty, and the shadows seemed to gather in the corners of the room, growing heavier with each step I took. The floor was littered with broken pews, rotting wood, and pieces of what might have once been stained glass, now shattered into jagged shards. But it wasn't the decay that unnerved me. It was what I saw on the walls. Etched into the crumbling stone were more of the same symbols from the map, the same ones I'd seen around the village. They covered the walls in intricate patterns, forming circles and spirals that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Some of them were faint, like they'd been etched years ago, but others were fresh, the lines still sharp and dark against the stone. I stepped closer to one of the symbols, my breath shallow. The feeling of being watched was now unbearable. Every corner of the chapel seemed to hold something, someone hidden in the shadows. I could almost feel eyes on me, staring from places I couldn't see. I reached out to touch one of the symbols, my fingers trembling when I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the air around me. "Leave." I froze. The voice was faint, like a breeze passing through the chapel, but it was unmistakable. It came from somewhere inside, or was it from outside? I couldn't tell. I instinctively pulled my hand back from the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. My breath felt ragged as I turned in a circle, trying to pinpoint where the voice had come from. But there was no one, just the empty chapel, the symbols, the shattered remnants of what used to be a place of worship. My thoughts raced. Was this some kind of trick? Was I hearing things? But no, I knew better. I had experienced things like this before, things I couldn't explain. And this place, this village, was unlike anything I had ever encountered. I quickly left the chapel, stepping back out into the daylight. But as soon as I was outside, I realized I had made a mistake. The feeling that something was following me had intensified. It was no longer a distant sensation. It was pressing in on me, wrapping around me like an invisible shroud. The air had become thick again, suffocating, and I could hear the rustle of leaves from the trees. But it wasn't the wind. No, this was something else. A presence moving in the woods just beyond my reach. I turned back to the village, searching for the source, but I saw nothing. No movement, nothing out of the ordinary. I knew I had to get back to the car, back to safety. But as I turned to leave, the ground beneath me shifted again. I felt the sensation of something pulling at my ankles, like the very earth beneath me was alive, twisting and changing. I stumbled, losing my balance, and for a brief moment, I thought I would fall. But then, as if by some invisible force, the ground stilled. I caught my breath, standing still for a moment to steady myself, but something had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. I glanced up, and there, just at the edge of the trees, I saw it. A figure, barely visible but unmistakable. A man, or something that resembled one, standing in the shadows staring at me. I couldn't make out his features, but his presence was undeniable. He wasn't human. His posture was wrong, and the way he stood there, just watching, sent an icy wave of fear through my chest. I froze, not sure what to do. Was he one of the villagers? A ghost? A figment of my imagination? The whispers started again, and this time they were clearer. "You shouldn't have come." I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The figure took a step forward, and with that movement, the entire village seemed to stir, as if it were waking from a long, deep slumber. The ground began to tremble beneath my feet. The trees whispered. The wind howled. I was not alone, and I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The figure in the shadows took another step forward, and the world around me seemed to shift. It was like the air itself had thickened, pulling in closer, pressing on my chest, making it harder to breathe. The whispering in the trees grew louder, and the wind, once a gentle breeze, now howled in my ears, carrying with it a strange, eerie hum that seemed to come from the very earth beneath me. The village was alive. The trees, the stones, the very soil. It was all watching me, waiting. I could feel the presence of the figure in the shadows, its gaze unblinking, unwavering. It wasn't just a man. It wasn't anything human. I could tell that much just by looking at the way it moved, or rather, the way it didn't move. The figure seemed frozen, like it was waiting for something I wasn't prepared to face. But I couldn't move either. My feet felt rooted to the ground, and I could feel the pull of the village itself, as though it was drawing me closer. I took a tentative step back, my mind racing. Should I run? Should I scream for help? I wasn't even sure if I could make it out of the village, but there was something deep inside me telling me that the moment I turned my back, it would be the end. The figure wasn't just a watcher. It was a guardian or something worse. It wasn't going to let me leave. I tried to steady my breath, but the air was heavy, suffocating. The whispers seemed to wrap around me, carrying words I couldn't quite make out. They echoed in my mind, their meaning just out of reach, like a distant memory. You shouldn't have come. The voice was the same as before, but this time it was clearer. It was deeper, more forceful, almost as if the voice came from the figure itself. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt the chill creep up my spine. I looked around the village, trying to find a way out, but there was none. The buildings, once ruins, now seemed to rise up before me like silent sentinels. The path I had come down was gone, swallowed up by the dense woods. The clearing where I had stood was no longer there. I was trapped. I turned my gaze back to the figure in the shadows. It hadn't moved, but somehow it was closer. My mind raced. Had I been so absorbed in the village that I hadn't noticed it approaching? Or had it always been here, watching me, waiting for the right moment to make its move? The figure had never made a sound, yet it was present in every corner of my vision. Its very being seemed to block out the rest of the world. The village had come to life around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "Leave now," the figure intoned, its voice colder now, almost like a command. "Leave this place, or you will never leave at all." The finality in its voice sent a shiver down my spine. I had no idea what it meant by that. What would happen if I didn't leave? What had happened to the others, the ones who had found this place before me? I glanced down at the map, now crumpled in my hand, and the symbols on it that seemed so harmless before now seemed to pulse with life. The eerie symbols that had surrounded Hollis Haven on the map, had they been warnings all along? Had they been placed there to keep people away? To keep people from learning the truth? I turned away from the figure, my legs shaking beneath me, and took a step toward the village's edge. But before I could take another step, I heard a low growl, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere just beyond the trees. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Another step, then another. The growl grew louder, closer, and then came the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the brush. Something fast, something feral. My mind raced as I scanned the dark trees. I had no idea what was approaching me, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I turned and bolted, running through the village's winding streets, my heart thundering in my chest. The sounds of the growl and the rustling behind me were growing closer, louder, and I didn't dare look back. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder, but the air in the village felt thick, heavy, pulling me backward. It was like the village itself didn't want me to leave. I could hear footsteps behind me, not human footsteps. No, these were other, too heavy, too fast. I could feel the presence of whatever was chasing me, moving through the woods, closing in. I didn't know if it was one of the village's cursed inhabitants or something far worse, but I couldn't afford to stop and think. I just had to run. I stumbled, almost losing my balance as the ground beneath me seemed to change, shifting beneath my feet. The shadows grew longer, and I could feel them pressing against me, like hands reaching out from the trees, trying to pull me back into the heart of the village. I wasn't going to make it out. And then I saw it. The road, the path that led back to the highway. It was just up ahead, framed by the trees, a faint trace of daylight breaking through the canopy above. Hope surged through me as I pushed forward, determined to reach the path. I was almost there. But before I could take another step, I heard it again. The growl. Closer. The snapping of branches behind me. Then I felt something sharp grab my ankle. The sharp tug on my ankle sent a wave of panic through my body, and I collapsed to the ground, my hands scraping against the earth as I tried to regain my balance. I kicked out instinctively, desperate to break free from whatever had grabbed me, but the force was relentless, pulling me deeper into the shadows. I twisted around, my heart racing, but what I saw made my blood run cold. The tendrils of darkness, no longer just shadows, were wrapping around my legs, creeping up my arms, their cold, clammy touch like hands trying to drag me into the earth itself. My mind screamed for me to fight, to escape, but the more I struggled, the tighter the hold became. The ground beneath me seemed to give way, as if the very soil was alive, hungry, pulling me into its depths. You shouldn't have come back. The voice came again, closer now, echoing from the forest itself. The figure, that thing, was still standing at the edge of the village, its form more solid now, more defined. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was controlling this, orchestrating it. The forest, the shadows, the earth, they were all part of it. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, like something was blocking my air, constricting around my neck. The whispers rose again, louder now, overlapping, until it felt like they were inside my head, clawing at my thoughts. Leave this place. You cannot stay. The darkness surged forward, pulling harder, wrapping itself around my body. My vision blurred and I felt my pulse racing, my body growing weak with each passing second. The cursed village, the ruins, the figures in the shadows, they were all a part of this. They were all alive in a way that I couldn't understand, feeding off of my fear, pulling me deeper into its grip. Desperation flooded my veins as I fought back, my legs kicking out, my hands clawing at the ground, trying to break free. But no matter how much I struggled, the darkness only grew stronger. I couldn't move, couldn't escape. The forest had claimed me. There was no way out. It was like being trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. And then, through the haze of fear and darkness, I heard a voice. It wasn't the growling or the whispers. It was different. It was familiar. You should have listened. I turned my head with great effort, and there, just beyond the darkness, stood the man, the figure who had been watching me all this time. He was standing in the same spot where I had seen him earlier, just beyond the edge of the light. But this time I could see his face more clearly. His eyes were black, empty, and his skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones. His smile was twisted, full of malice. "You broke the rules," he continued, his voice cold and smooth like it was a fact. "And now you're part of this place." I wanted to scream again, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to run, to fight back, but my body wouldn't obey. The more I struggled, the deeper the shadows seemed to sink into me, the harder it became to breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, and every movement felt like it was draining the last remnants of strength from my body. The figure stepped closer, and I could feel the pull of the darkness intensify. "The village claims those who dare disturb it." He leaned in, his breath cold against my ear. "And you're no different." The ground trembled beneath me again, the earth rumbling like an ancient beast stirring from its slumber. I could feel the roots of the trees reaching toward me, extending their long, twisted fingers beneath the surface of the earth. The entire village, the entire forest, seemed to be awakening, shifting, alive in a way I had never understood. The figure moved away slightly, and I thought for a moment that he was going to leave, that maybe I had a chance to escape. But then the ground opened up in front of me. Wide, jagged cracks split the earth, and something deep within the village stirred. A cold wind howled through the trees, and a strange shape appeared in the distance, emerging from the shadows. It was a creature, tall and slender, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its body obscured by the darkness. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as anything else. I could hear its footsteps as it moved toward me, the ground shuddering beneath each step. I tried to push myself away, but my legs felt like lead, my body refusing to obey. The creature stopped just in front of me, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It reached down, its hand hovering just above my head, and I felt a pressure, something immense, something ancient, pressing down on me, closing in. "No one leaves," it said, its voice low, guttural, like it was speaking from a place beyond time. "You are a part of us now." The air around me grew colder still, and I felt the last remnants of warmth slip away. The village had claimed me, just like it had claimed everyone before me. I had broken the rules, and now I was part of the curse that had swallowed Hollis Haven whole. There was no escape. The village had won, and as the creature's hand descended, I knew that I would never leave. I had become one with the shadows, one with the darkness. My story, like the others before me, would be swallowed by the village. The cycle would continue, and Hollis Haven would wait for the next curious soul to stumble upon its cursed ruins. The creature's hand hovered just above me, its fingers long and gnarled, its form a silhouette against the deepening shadows. I could feel the weight of its presence, the suffocating pressure of the forest and the village pressing in from all sides. The whispers were now a constant hum, the sound of the trees themselves speaking in voices that were both foreign and familiar. There was no escape. The darkness had already claimed me. The creature's hand descended, brushing my forehead with its cold fingers. The moment it touched me, the ground beneath me shifted, as if the earth itself was alive. I could feel something ancient stirring beneath the surface, something old and hungry. The air became thick with that familiar chill, the cold that seeped into my bones, gnawing at me, dragging me further into the depths of the village. "You belong here now," the creature whispered, its voice reverberating through my mind like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. "You are part of the cycle." I couldn't respond. My mouth felt dry, my limbs frozen in place. The darkness around me deepened, the shadows pressing in like fingers around my throat. The figure in front of me leaned in, its eyes glowing faintly, watching me with a look that felt more predatory than anything human. The village claims all who enter. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a statement, a truth, and the truth was inescapable. No one who entered Hollis Haven had ever left. I was no different. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the air had been sucked out of me. The cold had sunk deeper into my chest, tightening my lungs, and I could feel the weight of the shadows closing in, suffocating me, dragging me under. Suddenly, the creature straightened, its attention shifting slightly, its gaze turning toward the village. I followed its line of sight, my heart racing, and I saw it. More creatures emerging from the shadows. Tall, hunched figures, their limbs long and stretched, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. There were more of them, all watching me, moving slowly, purposefully toward the heart of the village. I tried to move again, to break free, but my body was still frozen. My mind screamed for me to run, to fight, but I couldn't. The village had taken root inside me. The shadows, the whispers, they were inside my mind now. I was part of this place, part of the curse that had kept it alive for so long. The creatures circled around me, their eyes glowing, their movements fluid and unnatural. They were waiting, and I knew without a doubt that they weren't just watching me. They were watching for something, someone. They were waiting for me to join them. A cold, sickening realization washed over me. This wasn't just a curse on the village. This was a curse on anyone who stumbled upon it. The village had been waiting for me, just like it had waited for the others. The cycle continued, and there was no escape. "You'll become part of us," one of the creatures said, its voice thick with anticipation. "Part of the village's heart." The words echoed in my mind, sending a jolt of panic through me. There was no fight left in me, no way to run. The darkness had already claimed me, and I felt myself sinking deeper into its cold embrace. I was already a part of the village, and now I would remain here forever, just another lost soul swallowed by the forest. I glanced back at the village, the broken buildings, the crumbling streets. They were all part of the same pattern, the same unending cycle. It wasn't just a place, it was a living, breathing entity, a curse that lived on through its inhabitants, through the lost souls who had walked its paths and disappeared without a trace. And now, I was one of them. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something was twisting inside me, pulling me further into the shadows. The whispers grew louder again, their voices blending together into one overwhelming cacophony. I could feel the presence of the village, the creatures pressing in on me. I was fading, slipping away, becoming part of the forest, part of the village that had waited for me. My vision blurred as I saw the trees shift, the ground swallow me, and the figures that surrounded me began to fade into the darkness. The whispers never stopped. And then, as I finally lost consciousness, I heard it one last time, a single voice piercing through the chaos. "You are home."